This podcast is brought to you by Most Valuable Podcasts, leading the league in podcasting entertainment.
What's up, everybody? Ricky Widmer here, along with the one, the only, Brandon Swanson.
Hey.
And another week, Brandon, another week where you're not just going to be on the Primetime Podcast, which we're doing right now, you're also going to be on the Onside Kick. This is a double podcast week of both you and I. Both you and I for all football, college football, NFL, we're doing it again. We're doing a thing. So you guys are going to hear Brandon for the Primetime Podcast like you always do. But then the Onside Kick, we're doing it again.
I'm looking forward to it.
But we're going to get into some big things. I'm getting right into it. First off, Primetime Podcast. If you're new, thank you guys for checking out. If you're returning, it's great to see you guys and listen to, well, you're not listening. I'm not listening to you. They're listening to us. Talk to you guys again as we talk about some big news in college football. A little house cleaning, well, housekeeping. Before I'm still getting better with that. I'm trying to catch myself after I was corrected. Patreon.com/Most Valuable Podcast. You want to be like our newest patron, Jake Neverman, and be on a podcast. He's going to be on a podcast this month. $10. That's the reward you get for $10. We have all sorts of different rewards for you guys to help the podcast out more so than watching and hitting that like and subscribe button. But Brandon, today, talking about all college football, obviously. And what we're talking about is, number one, are we set up for Alabama and Clemson Part 3? We're also going to look at LSU and the debacle going down there. Should they move on from Ed Orgeron? And then we're going to look at Saquon Barkley and if he is the clear winner/favorite for the 2017 Heisman Trophy before making our Week 6 picks to end the podcast. But I'm going to throw it over to you like I always do. We've got Alabama, number 1, 5-0. We've got Clemson, who I've picked against twice now, and the fans are already hearing it. Like, they're letting me hear it. Where, Brandon, we had a comment this past week on, I think it was our picks video or the video we talked about Clemson, Virginia Tech, and the commenter said, $10 Ricky picks Wake Forest over Clemson next week. I don't think I'm going to do that this week. I think Clemson fans can be confident that I picked them, but with these two teams 1 and 2 in the polls after 5 games of the season, are we set up for an Alabama Clemson Part 3 when we get to the playoffs?
Right now we are. You take a look at everyone, even in the top 5. You've got your Oklahomas who've been good. You've got your Penn States who have been good. But if you're looking for the best 2 teams in your top 5, it's number 1 Alabama, it's number 2 Clemson. And you look at Clemson through 5 weeks, they've beaten, at the time, the number 13 team, at the time, the number 14 team, and at the time, the number 12 team. They've already beat 3 ranked opponents this season, and we're 5 games in. So Clemson's been very good. They've taken things in stride. And again, I did not expect this from Clemson this year. When they had all those guys leaving, all those guys, especially Deshaun Watson, who made a big name for himself this past weekend in the NFL.
Hope you had him in fantasy, Brandon. Hope you had him in fantasy. I know I didn't.
I didn't at all. My team could barely score 60 points this week. But it seemed like a season where Clemson would be rebuilding. They'd be moving to a new quarterback. We weren't sure who it was going to be, who was going to be the guy in the receiving game, who was replacing Wayne Gallman, who was doing all this, who was going to replace some of the big guys defensively. All these question marks. And they filled every hole. And they've been pretty effective, clearly. I mean, there are people who are saying that Clemson should be number 1 right now and that Alabama should be number 2. And the reason, because the only team that Alabama's beat was week 1, Florida State, when Florida State was ranked at the time. And since then, they're going to say that Alabama has not beat anybody. But in the last 2 weeks, it's been a 59-0 score and a 66-3 score against Vanderbilt and against Ole Miss. Now, not 2 teams that are, high in the polls by any means, but I think that Alabama still probably until they lose. It's kind of one of those until you lose or until you show us otherwise, you're probably good for number 1. But Clemson, a very strong number 2. But going back to the question you asked at the very beginning to open up this segment, are we looking at a Alabama-Clemson Part 3 in the making? And right now, the way that we're going, the route that we're moving on through 5 weeks into the season, that's exactly what we're looking at right now.
You want to know how good, and this is the one thing I'll say for the people out there that are either watching or listening to this right now, or you either have a friend that believes this. When you brought up the fact that there are some people that believe that Clemson should be number 1 over Alabama, I get the whole argument of who have you played? And I mean, yes, Clemson dominated Louisville, and I'm going to say they dominated Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech was not in that game. 31-17, they were not in that game. That defense for Clemson showed up. Kelly Bryant showed up. But have you seen Alabama this season? Have you seen them? Vandy comes off of a big win, talking trash. Spanks you, shutout win, 59-0. Old Miss comes into town. I know Old Miss is not what they used to be, 66-3. The most points that they've had scored on them, and correct me if I'm wrong because I don't have Alabama's schedule up, I believe it was, 23 or 27 points, and that was Colorado State, has scored the most points against Alabama. This team, and the biggest stat for Alabama this year, is their highest total efficiency through 5 games is at 97.3. First off, the highest efficiency, the 3 highest total efficiencies through 5 games are all owned by Alabama. The 2010 team, the 2012 team, and now the 2017 team. They are tied with their own selves that were back in 2012. Do you remember the 2012 season for Alabama? Do you remember how that season ended for Alabama? Being the Alabama fan, it's okay if you don't.
Ricky, you ask me all these questions. You never prepare me for this shit.
I don't.
And then you just throw it out there to me. No, I can barely remember what I had for breakfast today.
This could be very reminiscent of what we see this year. It was the Alabama team that only lost 1 game. They lost to, I believe, a certain Johnny Manziel on November 10th of 2012. Then they go into Western Carolina. They beat them. They beat Auburn. They beat number 3 Georgia in the SEC title game. And then on January 7th, they completely spank the number 2 team in the country, the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. That laughable, I'm going to say laughable.
That was 2012.
BCS championship.
That was 2012.
That was the 2012. The bowl game was in 2013.
Doesn't feel like it was that long ago.
It doesn't feel like it at all. But that game was dominated by Alabama. That is how good in the efficiency department Alabama is this year. So, that's why when I was thinking coming into this podcast, I was like, you know what? I'm like, we got to talk about Alabama. Alabama has been, to me, quietly really good. No one, it gets to the point with me where nobody really talks about Alabama because you know what? Alabama won 66-3. Whatever. Alabama's supposed to do that. And I'm like, I feel like this Alabama team is really fucking good this year every time I watch them. However, with the side of Clemson, I don't want to take away anything from them. They have, especially in my eyes, because I've been kind of a Clemson doubter this year, especially if you go and re-listen to our Clemson preview, I wasn't high on Kelly Bryant. I wasn't high on the Clemson Tigers coming into this year. So, I mean, with them being 5-0, I look at the rest of Clemson's schedule, maybe 1 loss, maybe they lose to Florida State or NC State or Georgia Tech, but probably not. This is a team that's probably now going to go undefeated and win the SEC, especially with Florida State not having DeAndre Francois. And Alabama, to me, is the team that has, I kind of say, oh yeah, they have the biggest roadblock in their way with potentially Georgia playing them in the SEC title game. But if 2012 showed anything, if they're as efficient as they are right now, they don't care who you are. They'll beat you. And that's just how it'll go.
Yeah, and right now for Alabama, going back to them, one of the things coming into this season was Jalen Hurts and how is Jalen Hurts going to be. And Jalen Hurts has so far showed to be very, very good and coming right along in his sophomore season. Another just under 200-yard game, 2 touchdowns. That's through the air, and then on the ground, add another 100 and a touchdown.
Remember when we talked about a quarterback controversy with Alabama?
You talked about it.
Controversy or blessing? That was the question we asked. Remember when we talked about that?
No, I do remember that.
Put the shoe in my mouth. That's what Jalen Hurts is doing.
Yeah, but Alabama again overall they're just showing that they haven't lost a step either. Offensively, they look really good. They've got everybody in their mom who can run the football, and then on defense they continue to be just so dominant. It's been really truly a fun time to watch Alabama football as it always is. But I think on the other side too, when you talk about Clemson. As much fun as I like I said, I enjoy watching Alabama and I enjoy being able to see what they're doing. But Clemson's doing such a good job. And in that game against Virginia Tech, going into it, what did we both kind of talk about? The team that doesn't turn the football over is going to be the team that wins. And we both were saying, okay, Josh Jackson, he's going into this game, he only has thrown 1 interception. He right now looks like the guy who could win this battle between him and then Kelly Bryant. Kelly Bryant coming in, I think, to only 2 touchdowns, 3 picks. Kelly Bryant throws for almost 200 yards, 1 touchdown, no interceptions. Again, adding a ton of yards on the ground. But on the other side, Josh Jackson, he throws only 1 touchdown. He throws 2 interceptions. One of them returned for a touchdown. Clemson's defense, again, has been very, very good, very dominant, and Virginia Tech wasn't able to figure it out. And like you mentioned just not long ago, Virginia Tech wasn't able to figure it out, and now it's down to, okay, are any of these teams going to be able to figure it out? Any of them? These ranked teams couldn't do it.
Yeah.
Now, is Syracuse going to do it? I highly doubt they're not. Is Georgia Tech going to do it? I don't think so, but because of their triple option, it always causes a kind of defense to think a little bit more with what they're going to do just because of that, because there's so many options in that offense and that scheme that they run. NC State is probably the next best threat for Clemson, but Clemson's defense has been so good. And when we talk about Alabama and Clemson and having this rematch, it's looking more and more, again, very early, very premature, 5 weeks into the season, it's looking like those are the 2 best teams because they are the 2 best defenses.
Well, and the thing that I was going to ask you is when it comes to, I have a feeling that both of these 2 teams are going to end up, at this point in the season, I have a feeling, and I know we're only 5 games in, I have a feeling they're both going to be undefeated now. I feel like Virginia Tech was the last opponent for Clemson, and like both of these teams, their next big test to me will come in their title game. Clemson will probably get a rematch they'll either get a rematch with Virginia Tech or we'll see Clemson-Miami, and we'll see if Miami has anything that they would like to bring to the party and see if they can upend the Clemson Tigers. For Alabama, I look at their schedule, and I think it is going to be a very long season of them blowing out teams until we get to maybe the Iron Bowl, but I still think they win that in Auburn. Their next test is going to be if they play Georgia in the SEC championship game.
Let me ask you this question really quickly, and I ask you this because it's just something that I'm a little bit interested in. So Texas A&M, we all know how they started off the season, and those of you who are avid watchers of the Primetime Podcast and followers of the Primetime Podcast know that we talked about Kevin Sumlin be fired after that first game debacle, just because of everything that's kind of been going on the last couple of years and the mediocrity, and then what happened in that first game against UCLA. Now Kevin Sumlin's taken his guys. They're now 4-1, a quiet 4-1 in the SEC. The next game Alabama plays on the road at Texas A&M. You like to say it a lot, Ricky. You think that's a trap game?
Nope.
You think that after everybody, because I know what I think.
Nope.
But I am interested only because Alabama has been on just such this high. And I think last year or maybe the year before, people were like, oh, Texas A&M, I think they were ranked 15 or something like that. Okay, this is going to be the best chance for a team to beat Alabama, or the best game against Alabama. It turned out Alabama, I think, ended up beating them like 30-something to 15, something around that score. On the road at Texas A&M, any chance at all that we see Alabama struggle there against a 4-1 A&M?
Not a chance. And the reason why is there have only been 2 games this year where Texas A&M has not taken a deficit into halftime. The first game, they led huge against UCLA, let Josh Rosen and the Bruins come back and beat them. Most of the games since then, South Carolina, a South Carolina team that's 3-2 but isn't a tough SEC team, they went into halftime down 10-7. I know it's only 3 points, but it was still a deficit. Then you look at the Arkansas Razorback game. I know I'm doing this out of order, but that's just how I have them on my computer. This is the other one where they took a lead into halftime. I believe if I'm doing my math right, it was 21-17. No, actually, no, it was a deficit because it was 21-17 Texas A&M. Another Arkansas on top going into half. Then you look at Nicholls State. They're up in this one. This is the one they were up 14-6. That was the only other one they were up. Then the Raging Cajuns of Louisiana, they're down 21-14 going into half. I know they won those games, I'm totally just giving away my pick for the pick segment in this segment that we're talking right now. Alabama's going to take a big lead going into the first half. Texas A&M they're going to start out slow because that's what it seems like they do this year. Alabama's going to make them pay. It's going to be like 28-3 going into the half at the least. At the least, game over at halftime. Game over. If you're down 21-3 against this Alabama team right now, pack it up. Pack it up, you got the loss. That's how good this Alabama team has been this year. They've had no road bump. And the thing I was going to say before you asked that question was I look at Alabama's schedule, Texas A&M, not a chance they win that, or not a chance they get upset in that game. Arkansas, get out of here. Tennessee, throw it in the garbage bin. That's what your season is right now. LSU, you lost to Troy. If you're going to lose to Troy, there's no way you're beating Alabama this season. Mississippi State, I would have said, if they would have won these last 2 games, I would have said, okay, maybe.
Mississippi State, and we will probably get to this. We could probably get to this later. Mississippi State has been a team that's really disappointed the last couple of weeks because
maybe it's because I picked them to win.
I think we're seeing a different Mississippi State team these last couple of weeks than what we saw in that game against LSU. And now people may say, after what LSU has looked like, may say, well, that's just LSU. They're just not that competitive this year. But Mississippi State looked really, really good. They struggled, couldn't get anything going against Georgia, and then they struggled against an Auburn team that had struggled to put up points before that, 2 weeks before that. So it's been kind of an interesting up and down college football season for a couple of these teams. But you're right. I mean, that could be an interesting one that's on the road at Mississippi State. But the way that Alabama's playing right now, and then you got Mercer, who, again, I don't even know if I can click on them yet on ESPN.
Hey, they gave Auburn a game, though. They gave Auburn a game.
And then they end, and Alabama then ends with Auburn on the road at Auburn. But Alabama right now, they are looking so good, so strong. And you have such a great defense to lean on, but that offense, Jalen Hurts is really good for this team. And then they've got about 4 to 5 different running backs that can get the job done, with their top 2 being Damian Harris and then Bo Scarborough, who both of them very, very good.
And that's why I want to say a quote here that is on ESPN from the, I can't remember what show it is. It's the one that Greg McElroy does on ESPN. And Jalen Hurts on that show said, we have playmakers everywhere, whether it's Harris, whether it's Scarborough. I know he only has 2 touchdowns, but there's a reason why Calvin Ridley was a top 10 mock draft pick in the NFL mock draft coming into this season. They have guys that can make plays everywhere. And that's why the last thing I wanted to ask you to kind of end this is bringing Clemson back into this, because I know we went on an Alabama tangent a little bit.
Sorry, Clemson. You guys deserve just as much respect.
Here's what I want to ask. Is there any team in the rankings right now, either Oklahoma, Penn State, Georgia, Washington, Michigan, TCU, Wisconsin, Ohio State, Washington State, is there anyone that you see if they go up against either Alabama or Clemson in the playoffs, you can see this team could get the upset to where we don't get Alabama-Clemson Part 3.
I really want to say Penn State because
you also like Saquon Barkley.
You look at that team, and right now no one's been able to shut down Saquon. He's been absolutely fantastic. They have a great quarterback and Trace McSorley. You've got Saquon Barkley. You've got a defense that's been pretty strong so far this season. So if you're looking for a team that's not Clemson, that's not Alabama, Penn State right now would probably be my pick. And I know people are going to say, well, they barely beat Iowa. Well, they were on the road at Iowa, and Iowa actually showed that they're a better team than I think people expected them to be. At least played pretty tough. Their defense did a really good job in that game. But there's going to be an interesting game this week for Penn State. I think on the road at Northwestern will be a very interesting game. And then they have actually, I think, 4 tough games in a row. 4. They have at Northwestern, home versus Michigan, on the road at OSU, and then on the road again against Michigan State. People are kind of, I think, counting out Michigan State, but don't. And that's the team that I would look at right now, Penn State, just because they have so many weapons. Who are you going to shut down? I mean, I don't think you can shut them down fully if you're Clemson's defense or Alabama's defense, but that's why I would pick Penn State out of anyone right now, kind of in the top 10 outside of an Alabama or Clemson.
The team that I am going to go with is the one that we talked about last week. We asked this kind of similar question about this team last week, if they can upset Alabama if they play. It's Georgia. Georgia right now has been, to me, there are 3 teams that have been really good to me. Alabama's been on fire. I will give Clemson their due after picking against them against Louisville and Virginia Tech. I almost said Virginia State, but Virginia Tech made them look like Virginia State, let's be honest. Clemson's the clear number 2. My 3rd best team, and the rankings don't really signify this, is Georgia. Georgia's a team where I know they had that close game against Notre Dame, but they're a team that since the injury to Eason, most teams it's like our quarterback got injured, we're done. Pack it in. We don't have the guy to look at Florida State. Basically, all of us here in the media and some fans are going, fuck it, pack it in. They can't beat Clemson now. They're not going to the playoffs. They don't have DeAndre Francois. But Fromm comes in. It was Sanford is in the first one, so 42-14. But Mississippi State beating them 31-3. That was a game where both of us picked the wrong Bulldog in that game. And then Tennessee, they go into Rocky Top and beat them 41-0. Now if they go into Vanderbilt, a Vanderbilt team, I know that Alabama kind of got the first crack at them to knock them off their pedestal. But if Georgia can really just knock them 10 feet under the ground in that confidence, this to me is the 3rd best team in the nation right now. And they have the best chance to. They are going to be a team that I believe, Brandon, 1, plays Alabama in the SEC title game, but 2, even if they lose that game, I think we're going to have the discussion after that game of could Georgia be 4 in the playoff and have Alabama and Georgia, a 1-loss Georgia team in the playoff, because people are going to say they lost to Alabama, and I think it'll be a close enough game. I'm not saying like 3 points, but a close enough game to where people go, oh, come on, this team is good. They should be number 4. That's what I'm feeling when I look at this Georgia team.
Georgia's been a good team, and they've been a fun team to watch in their last 2 weeks of a 31-3 score and then a 41-0 score against Tennessee. Those have been 2 pretty much statement games.
Yep.
And I think not only statement games for Florida, but statement games for the teams on the other side. I think a big statement game for Mississippi State that says, okay, we got to wake up and get things going. Then they weren't able to. And then a big wake-up call for Tennessee that says, okay, we have run out of all the horseshoes in the building. What are we going to do now?
And a big reason, well, not a huge reason, but it's nice to see Nick Chubb have almost 500 yards and 6 touchdowns through 5 games.
And
like,
that's
the resurgence of Nick Chubb going, like, kind of seeing him show shades of what he was like before his knee injury.
And that's what we talked about in the preseason is Georgia will be good. I know we talked about the quarterback position. We talked about Eason. This is obviously before he got injured. But we talked about Nick Chubb. And if Nick Chubb can return to that pre-injury form, this is going to be a good Georgia Bulldog team. And right now, things are running through Nick Chubb. If they didn't have him, I think we'd see a bit of a different Georgia team, a bit of a different scheme. But right now, it certainly helps having Jake Fromm, who has filled in very nicely for Jacob Eason. It's been really nice to be able to also lean on the running game and have Nick Chubb and have him look like the Nick Chubb of old.
Well, and this is where we're going to turn it on to you guys. Let us know, what do you guys think? Are we setting up for an Alabama-Clemson Part 3? Or is there one team out there that you think this team is going to slide in or make the playoffs, not necessarily slide into the playoffs, but make the playoffs and be an upset candidate team for either one of these two teams when we get to the college football playoff? Let us know what you guys think down below in the comment section.